Hello, I'm teacher Karina, and I'm here to share some information with you about Philip K. Dick. Philip Dick is an American novelist and short story writer, best known for his science fiction short stories, many of which have been translated into films.
He was born in 1928, which was really in the middle of not quite the end of the Big Depression.
And at the time, Phil was one of the smallest premature babies to survive. But his sister was even smaller, and she simply did not make it.
He thought that she should have lived, and he died. A personality in his mind about how she would be if she had lived. We went to grade school together at Hillside School in Berkeley. I wasn't aware of any mental problems, but I was aware that he was quite strange. Phil and I discovered fantasy. I think we first discovered it in comic books.
When Philip was in high school, he got his first regular job at University Radio. He started at the University of California and didn't stay a full semester, and he was virtually self-taught. You know, he loved literature and he was very interested in psychology.
And he was also a pioneer in having a deep skepticism about the nature of reality. And that's the aspect of Dick's work that I think makes him seem so peculiarly contemporary.
How do I know that my internal view of reality is real? Then you have a Philip kind of situation.
He had a rather complex psychological life. He had numerous nervous breakdowns, whatever that means. He went to see a psychiatrist as a teenager. He had various phobias, agoraphobia, eating phobias, and so forth.
In 1955, Philip K. Dick's first novel, Solar Lottery, was published. The city of Berkeley was thriving with student demonstrations and the politically left-wing ideas of Marxism and communism. Although Dick tried to distance himself from these more radical political views, the atmosphere contributed to his already existing paranoid tendencies.
Contact with the FBI early in his college career because he joined a communist student club, and this was the McCarthy era, when communists were evil and they were going to take over the world.
In the 60s, they were not groundless fears. There were federal agents who were taking pictures of people. Later came out that wasn't a delusion. They really were doing that. During the period when he was writing his mainstream novels and living with Anne, he took amphetamines every day. And he did that so that he could write a lot. He thought that he didn't want to waste his time sleeping, and these things would keep him from sleeping. And they also apparently accelerated his inspiration. Almost convinced that God was evil or indifferent to human suffering.
Phil had a strong belief in God, the creator of this world, but he believed, as many offshoots of Christianity do believe, that this world was created by an evil or inferior God, and that the actual one God is trying to save us from this imperfect world.
Phil liked Anne particularly because she was the ex-wife of the editor of a magazine that was published in New York. And they were the first publishers of Allen Ginsberg, and it was a highly respected magazine. And while he was living with her, he wrote a whole series of mainstream novels.
He had this woman in the novels over and over and over that was a murderess and an adulteress, and they were all based on me. These novels of the 60s. And I did find that a little disturbing. He had this little gun he was pointing at me. It was very frightening. I was angry at him for leaving me. It's a terrible thing to do to your wife. Nancy came out here with her, she was 19 years old. She came out here with her stepmother.
In July 1966, Philip K. Dick marries Nancy Hackett. In August of 1970, Nancy takes their daughter and leaves the house in Santa Venetia. Depressed and driven by destructive behavior, Philip opens his house to the social outcast and the debauchery of young writers, bohemians, and junkies.
And then he started getting kind of paranoid about people like spying on him, and there was some instance of someone breaking into his home, and maybe that had to do with drugs. It probably did.
As you know, in the late 1960s, experimentation with mind-altering drugs became common among artists who sought new forms of expression. Philip K. Dick was no exception to this. His activity with psychedelics may have contributed to his extrasensory experiences.
The connection between drugs and what I was saying earlier about his skepticism about reality really finds expression in the LSD culture. People like Timothy Leary. The feeling that the experience one had under drugs was revealing that this is all an elaborate play being staged for our benefit to keep us politically quiescent. And drugs allow you to see behind that facade and realize that there is another reality.
In November of 71, he says my house was hit. And he thinks it was the FBI that broke in and trashed his house. And so he fled to Canada, living in Vancouver, where he made, unfortunately, his first suicide attempt.
His house had been melodramatically broken into and robbed. And even the police had, I believe, implied that they thought it would be a good idea if he went away and never came back.
Before I met Phil, I was simply trying to escape from my dysfunctional family.
In 1973, Christopher Kenneth Dick is born. Gradually, Dick returns to his writing and in a letter to a friend describes his marriage to Tessa. He writes, "We are living in a Philip K. Dick novel." Encouraged by these recurring visions, he now believes that reality is a projection that hides or conceals the ultimate truth. This theme is constant throughout his novels, but now in his real life, he believes this to be true.
VALIS is an acronym. It stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. In other words, he thought that the artificial intelligence should be called VALIS. I think for Phil, VALIS was a conduit to the information, not exactly to God himself, but to the information that would explain God in terms that he could understand. Because in our tradition, you cannot stand face to face with God. You would die. So you need an intermediary, and that would be the satellite voice or VALIS.
If you believe, as I do, that people are aware of their impending deaths, that on some deep level they know they may be coming to the end of their lifetime, the need to find answers to lifelong questions in those circumstances becomes especially pressing and urgent. And so it's no mystery, I think, why Dick would take this process of projection, which has always been in his work, and find some kind of ultimate affirmation in that. That science fiction becomes the ultimate reality. Well, what more validation would a science fiction writer need?
As far as whether these visions really happened, they did really happen to Phil. But as Phil would say, what is reality? Or as a great Zen Buddhist once said, am I the man dreaming he's a butterfly, or the butterfly dreaming that he's a man?
In Philip K. Dick's later years, he calls upon his mystical experiences as a plotline for the novels Valis and Radio Free Albemarle. According to your reports, it is impossible for us to determine whether these events were the result of a delusional mind or not.
His whole life had been very chaotic and unhappy until about 75, 76. And then he got his apartment, which became a condominium, which gave him a lot of stability. And he was finally making what to him was infinite money from, for example, the Blade Runner.
And the first one was Blade Runner. The book was called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And he died just as Blade Runner was being finished.
It was in February of 82, the 11th. Told me he was being interviewed and his eyes were failing. He couldn't see. And he wanted a psychological interpretation. And I said, Phil, I don't think it's that you can't see. I think your eyes are going. Go to the emergency room. And he reluctantly finally said, okay, I'll go. And I guess whoever was interviewing him, I think it was Greg Rickman, left. A couple hours later, he stroked.
You know, you have to feel like for Phil, the search was worth something. You know, the reason for the search was the search itself. It wasn't the end, it was the process. And I think maybe that's what kept him going.
Phil preferred to ask questions in his writing rather than offering answers. And his major question was, what makes us human? But he couldn't ever find just what it was, so he just kept on searching his whole life.
Was Philip